Every single time Barbara Hayes's big, shiny SUV rolled past my gate, a strange kind of magic happened in my bank account. Ding! Just like that, a little notification on my phone would light up, showing that more money had zipped its way into my wallet. She had absolutely no idea, not even the tiniest clue, that her angry, purposeful drives were basically paying my bills, one indignant glance and one furious swirl of dust at a time. It was completely wild, almost unbelievable, like she was allergic to my peace and happiness, and her daily commute somehow activated a secret, personal money machine. I would watch her from my living room window, sipping my lukewarm coffee, a small, secret smile playing on my lips. Her face would be pinched, her eyes narrowed, as if the very sight of my house, or perhaps just the thought of me inside it, caused her immense discomfort. And with every twitch of her brow, every stiff turn of her head, another little ding echoed in my mental register. It was glorious, truly. But to understand how such a strange, almost unbelievably wonderful thing could even be possible, a story so peculiar it might sound like something out of a comic book, we need to go back in time. We need to rewind to when the grass was genuinely greener, before the carefully manicured lawns of our quiet suburban street became a battleground, and long before Barbara Hayes decided that my perfectly ordinary mailbox was a personal insult to her very existence. My name is David Miller, and about a year and a half ago, I was probably the happiest guy on the planet. I had just moved into my dream house. It wasn't a mansion, no, but it was just right for me. A cozy 3-bedroom with a decent-sized yard in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood called Willow Creek. The air here always seemed a little fresher, the birds chirped a little louder, and the sunlight filtered through the ancient oak trees in a way that made everything feel soft and welcoming. After years of living in noisy apartment buildings and busy city centers, Willow Creek felt like a deep, calming breath. I pictured myself spending weekends puttering in the garden, maybe setting up a little workshop in the garage, and just enjoying the simple, peaceful rhythm of suburban life. I was excited to meet my neighbors, to wave to them as they passed by, and maybe even share a cup of sugar or a tool when needed. I genuinely believe that a good life is built on small acts of kindness and a willingness to understand others, even when they're different from you. I wanted to build a little sanctuary, a place where calm reigned, where I could unwind and simply be. When I bought the house, I knew Willow Creek had an HOA, a homeowners association. Every neighborhood seems to have one these days. They have rules, of course, about what you can and can't do with your house and yard. I even read the thick HOA handbook, cover to cover, during my lunch breaks. It felt like reading a phone book, but I did it. I understood that these rules were there to keep the neighborhood looking nice, to maintain property values, and to make sure everyone was generally on the same page about things like lawn care and house paint colors. I saw it as a fair trade-off for living in such a pristine community. I believed in respecting the rules, as long as they were fair and made sense. I wasn't someone who looked for trouble or tried to bend the rules, I just wanted to live my life quietly and happily. From the moment I started unpacking boxes, I began to notice Barbara Hayes. She lived 3 houses down from me, on the opposite side of the street. Her house was always immaculate, almost unnaturally perfect, like it had just stepped out of a magazine. Her car, a gleaming black SUV, was so spotless it seemed to reflect the sky without a single smudge. At first, my observations were just that, observations. I'd see her walking her tiny, yappy dog, its leash held taut, her posture ramrod straight. She was always impeccably dressed, even when just going to get the mail. I noticed she had a habit of slowly driving through the neighborhood, often with her head tilted slightly, as if scanning every single yard and house for any deviation from some invisible, perfect standard she held in her mind. I saw her chatting with other neighbors sometimes, but her conversations always looked very serious, her brow furrowed, her hands often making sharp, precise gestures. I remember thinking, wow, she really takes her community seriously. I initially dismissed it as her just being very observant, perhaps a little particular, but nothing more. Everyone has their quirks, right? I tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, always. My first real interaction with Barbara, the one that truly popped my peaceful bubble, happened about 2 months after I moved in. I decided my old, standard-issue mailbox, which had come with the house, needed an upgrade. It was a bit rusty and drab. I wanted something that added a little charm to my curb appeal, something that reflected the cozy, welcoming vibe I was trying to create inside my home. I spent a Saturday morning at a home improvement store, carefully picking out a beautiful, decorative mailbox. It was made of dark, wrought iron-looking metal, with a pretty scroll design on the side. It wasn't outlandish, wasn't huge or brightly colored, it was classic and tasteful. I even double-checked the HOA handbook, yes, that thick book, to make sure it fit all the size requirements and design guidelines. It seemed perfectly fine. I spent a cheerful afternoon digging a new post, mixing concrete, and carefully installing it. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my lawn, I stepped back, admired my handiwork, and felt a surge of pride. It was a small change, but it made the house feel more like mine. Later that very same day, as I was hosing down my driveway, still basking in the glow of my small achievement, Barbara's sleek black SUV glided to a silent stop in front of my house. My stomach gave a tiny, involuntary lurch. This was it, the first direct neighbor interaction. I smiled, ready to offer a friendly wave, perhaps even introduce myself properly. But her window rolled down with a faint whir, and her face, usually so composed, was set in a firm, unsmiling line. There was no friendly wave back, no welcoming smile. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice crisp and clear, like breaking ice, "I'm Barbara Hayes. I live down the street." She didn't offer her hand, just gestured vaguely towards her house. Her posture was stiff, her shoulders back, almost as if she were inspecting a flawed piece of art. "I'm also the head of the Architectural Review Committee for the HOA, she added, though I later found out she was a member, not the head. "I notice you've installed a new mailbox." "Yes, Ms. Hayes," I replied, trying to keep my tone friendly and open. "I just put it up this afternoon. I really like how it looks." I gestured towards it, feeling a bit like a proud kid showing off a drawing. She didn't even glance at it approvingly. Her eyes, cool and assessing, were fixed on my face. It's not compliant, Mr. Miller." I blinked. "Not compliant?" "Oh," I checked the handbook. "It's within the size limits, and it's a standard dark color, nothing bright or unusual." I thought it fit the guidelines. A thin, impatient line formed between her eyebrows. "The community aesthetic, Mr. Miller, is paramount. This mailbox, while perhaps standard in some areas, deviates from the established visual harmony of Willow Creek. We have a very specific, unspoken expectation of uniformity in certain fixtures." I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. Unspoken expectation? "Ms. Hayes, I read the literal rulebook. It doesn't say anything about unspoken expectations or visual harmony in a way that would exclude a mailbox like this." I tried to be polite, but my voice carried a hint of my bewildered frustration. It felt like she was pulling rules out of thin air. She gave a small, dismissive shake of her head. "Perhaps you missed the nuance. The guidelines are there to be interpreted, Mr. Miller. This is not about the letter of the law, but the spirit of the community. This mailbox, it stands out. And standing out, in this particular instance, is simply not acceptable." Her voice grew a little louder, a little more insistent, and I noticed a neighbor walking their dog slow down just a bit, their eyes darting towards our conversation. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice even. I truly wanted to avoid any kind of conflict. "I apologize if it's causing concern. I genuinely tried to follow the rules. Is there something specific I can do?" I'm happy to get a different one if you can point to the exact rule it breaks. I just want to be a good neighbor. I offered to show her the rulebook, to go through it with her, to find a compromise. I was trying to be empathetic, thinking maybe she was just overly zealous, perhaps new to her committee head role. I wanted to understand her perspective, even if it seemed a little unreasonable. But kindness seemed to bounce off Barbara like water off a duck's back. She didn't back down. Her eyes hardened. Mr. Miller, I don't have time for debates about interpretations. The HOA expects compliance. Consider this your informal warning. If the mailbox is not replaced with a more suitable, traditional model within 2 weeks, we will be forced to issue a formal violation notice. And you know what that means, don't you? Fines. Repeated fines. And then, well, further action. She paused, letting the words hang in the air, a subtle threat lingering in her tone. We don't tolerate disregard for our standards in Willow Creek. Her tone was chillingly cold, unyielding. I felt a slight shiver run down my spine, a realization blooming in my mind. This wasn't just about a mailbox. This was about power, about control. This was about her control over my choices, my property. I felt a sense of profound unfairness. How could a simple, pleasant mailbox, chosen with care and within the written rules, become such a point of contention? I tried to diffuse the situation, offering a vague, "I'll look into it further," just to get her to leave. She gave me one last stern look, rolled up her window, and her SUV silently glided away, leaving me standing alone on my driveway, the peaceful afternoon suddenly feeling very hollow. That evening, I felt genuinely disappointed. I moved here for peace and quiet, not petty disputes over mailboxes. My dream of a serene suburban life felt a little tarnished, a little less perfect. I reflected on Barbara's behavior, the rigid posture, the unyielding tone, the implied threats. It wasn't just my mailbox, I realized. I started to notice her car slowing down past other houses, her head turning, her eyes scanning. She was a self-appointed neighborhood watch, but not for crime, for conformity. Her presence felt less like a neighbor and more like a constant, hovering inspection. A strange thought began to form in the back of my mind, a tiny, almost comical spark related to her constant surveillance. If she was so good at noticing everything, perhaps there was a way to use that, but the idea was still vague, a mere whisper in the wind, a strange, half-formed thought for a different day. A few weeks later, the mailbox incident had thankfully quieted down, mostly because I ordered another, plainer one, just to appease her and avoid the hassle. I hadn't installed it yet, hoping she'd forgotten, or maybe, just maybe, she'd realized how ridiculous it all was. But Barbara Hayes never forgot. And she certainly never backed down. One sunny Saturday morning, I was outside, happily scrubbing a stubborn spot off my perfectly good wrought iron gate, the one that stood proudly at the entrance to my driveway. I had my headphones on, listening to some cheerful music, enjoying the fresh air and the simple task. I was humming along when I felt a shadow fall over me. I looked up and froze. Barbara Hayes's black SUV was not just driving by. It was stopped, dead center, right in front of my gate, completely blocking my driveway entrance. Her engine idled, a low hum of impatience. It was a direct, aggressive act. She rolled down her window, her face contorted in an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. Her mouth was a tight, thin line, and her eyes, usually just cool, were now blazing with an intensity that made me take a step back. "Mr. Miller!" She shrieked, her voice cutting through the morning calm, loud enough for any passing dog walker or jogging neighbor to hear. "This is simply outrageous. Absolutely unacceptable." I pulled off my headphones, utterly bewildered. "Ms. Hayes? Is there a problem?" She pointed a rigid, accusing finger directly at my gate, then at a tiny, almost invisible speck of dust on the concrete just beside it. "The state of your gate. And look. A leaf. A dead leaf from a non-native tree on my street. This is a disgrace. You are bringing down the aesthetic value of this entire street. I've had quite enough of your blatant disregard for our community standards. A dead leaf? A speck of dust? I looked from the pristine gate to the ground, then back to her furious face. My jaw literally dropped. This wasn't just about rules, this was personal. This was a full-blown assault on my right to exist in my own home. My initial desire for kindness, for empathy, for understanding, vanished like smoke. It was utterly wasted on her. I realized, in that exact moment, that I was dealing with someone who not only thrived on conflict but actively sought it out, someone who needed a target for her boundless, misplaced anger. As she slammed her window up with a dramatic flourish and sped off, leaving me fuming, standing there at my perfectly clean gate, a new, colder resolve settled over me. Okay, I thought, watching her car disappear down the street. If this is how it's going to be, then maybe it's time I learned how to play a different kind of game. A game she wouldn't even know she was playing. The next day, after Barbara's bizarre gate performance, the air around my house still felt thick with her lingering anger. I couldn't shake off the feeling of being unfairly targeted. Her baseless accusations about a dead leaf and non-native trees were so outlandish that they almost made me laugh, but the sting of her aggression, her loud, public shaming, was very real. It wasn't just about a tiny speck of dirt or a random leaf. It was about her wanting to assert dominance, to make me feel small and out of place in my own home. I realized that my attempts at being kind and understanding had only made me seem weak in her eyes, giving her more room to push. I spent most of Sunday in a quiet rage, pacing my living room, replaying the scene over and over. I considered all my options. I could complain to the HOA board, but what good would that do? Barbara claimed to be on the architectural review committee, and even if she wasn't at the head, she clearly had influence. It felt like trying to fight a ghost in a rulebook. I could also just ignore her, but her stopping her car in front of my gate felt like an invasion, a public challenge that I couldn't just sweep under the rug. This wasn't just a simple neighborly disagreement, it was turning into a full-blown personal vendetta. The idea of living under her constant, watchful eye, always waiting for her next baseless complaint, filled me with dread. My peaceful sanctuary was being threatened. As the day wore on, a different kind of thought started to bubble up, a little spark from that vague idea I had when I was upset about the mailbox. It was a thought born out of frustration, yes, but also out of a weird sense of curiosity. What if, instead of fighting Barbara head-on, I could find a way to, well, to make her impossible behavior somehow work for me? It sounded crazy, like something out of a cartoon, but the idea lodged itself in my mind and wouldn't let go. I began to think about her pattern. She loved to observe, to monitor, to drive past houses slowly, scrutinizing every detail. She was obsessed with appearances, with what she considered order. What if her very obsession could be turned into something profitable? I've always been a bit of a tinkerer, someone who loves to figure out how things work, to solve puzzles. I'm not a tech genius, but I enjoy learning about gadgets and systems. I started researching. I dove deep into the internet, looking up everything from home automation to clever ways people monitor their properties. I read articles about smart sensors, motion detectors, tiny cameras, and even less obvious things like traffic counters. I was looking for a specific kind of solution, something that could detect Barbara's presence without her ever knowing, and then trigger something else. The more I researched, the more an idea, seemingly outlandish at first, began to take shape in my mind. It was complex, involved multiple steps, and would require some serious dedication, but the more I thought about it, the more I believed it could actually work. My plan began with something small and unassuming, a tiny, low-power sensor. It wasn't a camera, nothing intrusive like that. This sensor was designed to detect specific types of movement or vibrations, very subtly. I ordered a few different kinds online, spending hours reading reviews and technical specifications, like a detective searching for the perfect clue. When they arrived, I experimented with them in my garage, connecting them to a small, quiet computer I owned, just to see if I could make them work the way I imagined. It was like building a very complex Lego set, piece by piece, testing each connection. My goal was to place one of these sensors very cleverly, right near my gate, but completely hidden from view. It needed to be sensitive enough to detect a passing car, specifically a large SUV like Barbara's, but not so sensitive that a squirrel running by would set it off. It was a challenge, a true puzzle. I spent several evenings after work, after everyone else on the street had settled down, carefully positioning and camouflaging the sensor. I buried a tiny wire discreetly under the edge of my lawn, running it back to a small, waterproof box hidden behind some bushes near my house. This box contained a tiny computer, barely bigger than a deck of cards, that would receive the signal from the sensor. It was all very secret, very understated. No lights, no sounds, nothing that would draw any attention. The next part of my plan involved something called an API, which stands for Application Programming Interface. It's like a secret handshake between different computer programs. I wanted my little hidden computer to shake hands with something that could make money. This was the trickiest part. I looked into various online platforms that offered small, automated payments for specific actions. After a lot of digging, I found a few options. One of them was a platform that paid small amounts for data analysis related to traffic patterns in different neighborhoods. It was legitimate, used by urban planners and researchers to understand how cars moved through residential areas. The payments were tiny, fractions of a cent per detection, but if there were enough detections, it could add up. The key was that the data had to be accurate, and the platform verified it through various means. It was all legal, all above board, just a very clever way to apply existing technology. My little computer, once connected to this platform, would essentially report, a vehicle just passed through this specific point. Each report, if verified by the platform's own checks, would earn me a tiny bit of money. It was like a little digital coin slot, waiting for a car to drive by. The genius of it, I thought, was that Barbara, with her constant, predictable patrols, was the perfect source of these detections. She was so consistent in her drives, so regular in her routes, always checking on the neighborhood. She was, unknowingly, providing the very data I needed. It took me almost 2 weeks to set everything up perfectly. There were late nights, moments of frustration when the sensor wouldn't connect, or the tiny computer wouldn't talk to the online platform. But slowly, meticulously, piece by piece, it all came together. I tested it with my own car, then with a friend's car, making sure it only triggered when a vehicle of a certain size and speed passed by. It was a low-tech solution to a high-stress problem, and I felt a growing sense of quiet satisfaction. I wasn't seeking revenge, not exactly. I was seeking a different kind of justice, a way to turn her negative energy into something positive for me, a way to reclaim my peace. The first few days after it was fully operational were tense. I watched Barbara's car drive by, my heart thumping a little faster. Nothing. No ding. I started to get discouraged, wondering if all my hard work had been for nothing. Maybe the sensor wasn't hidden well enough, or perhaps she had changed her route. Then, one Tuesday morning, as I was making my coffee, I heard the familiar hum of her SUV slowing down as it approached my house. I looked out the window, and sure enough, there she was, her neck craned, her eyes sweeping over my front yard, looking for a misplaced blade of grass or a slightly crooked birdbath. And just as her car was perfectly aligned with my gate, ding! My phone vibrated with a small notification. It was a fraction of a cent, barely anything, but it was there. It worked. A wave of triumph washed over me, a silent cheer erupting in my chest. It was real. She had absolutely no clue that her obsessive driving, her constant scrutiny, was literally putting money in my pocket. It was the most satisfying feeling, turning her negativity into my small, personal gain. I imagined her driving off, still fuming about some imaginary infraction, while I was sitting inside, enjoying my coffee, a tiny bit richer thanks to her. The next few weeks fell into a surprisingly calm rhythm, at least for me. Barbara continued her patrols, and my secret system continued to hum along, collecting its tiny payments. It was almost peaceful, knowing that her irritating presence was now financially beneficial. I started a small, separate savings account, playfully labeled Barbara's Bell, and watched the tiny amounts add up. It wasn't a lot, but it was a steady trickle, and it was deeply, incredibly satisfying. Then, one sunny afternoon, the false calm was shattered. I was in my backyard, finally installing the plain, unoffending mailbox I had ordered weeks ago, grudgingly admitting defeat on that front just to avoid further conflict. I had just finished tightening the last screw when I heard a furious pounding on my front door, rattling the glass. My dog, Buster, who usually just snoozed in the sun, barked once, a sharp, alarmed sound. My stomach clenched. I knew exactly who it was without even looking. I walked to the front door slowly, a sense of weary dread washing over me, but mixed with a strange new calm. I opened the door, and there she was, Barbara Hayes, her face red, her hands gripping a rolled-up piece of paper so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes were wild, almost frantic, and her usually perfectly styled hair looked a little disheveled, as if she had just rushed over in a fit of rage. She barely waited for me to fully open the door before she launched into a furious tirade, her voice much louder than usual, practically screaming. "Mr. Miller. This is completely unacceptable. Utterly, absolutely, undeniably outrageous." Her voice echoed through my entryway, sharp and piercing. My peaceful afternoon was officially, brutally, over. Barbara's face was a mask of pure fury, her eyes wide and bulging, fixed on me with an intensity that felt almost physical. The rolled-up paper in her hand, now saw, was an official-looking HOA letter. She practically vibrated with rage, her body language a coiled spring ready to unleash. My initial dread was quickly replaced by a surprising calm. After weeks of her petty annoyances and the escalating threats, I found a strange strength in knowing I had a secret weapon, something she was unknowingly fueling. The tiny ding notifications from my phone had become a comforting rhythm in my life, a quiet defiance to her increasingly loud and aggressive behavior. This is what I'm talking about, Mr. Miller," she shrieked, unfolding the letter with a dramatic flourish, her voice echoing in the quiet entryway of my house. "Another violation. A formal notice. Do you even care about the integrity of this community? About property values? About the rules we all agreed to uphold?" I stood my ground, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. "Ms. Hayes, please lower your voice. There's no need to yell. What exactly is the violation this time?" I tried to keep my tone even, but inside, I was bracing myself for the absurd. Knowing her, it could be anything from a misplaced garden gnome to a blade of grass that was half an inch too tall. She thrust the letter towards me, her finger jabbing at a specific paragraph. "The mailbox. The original, unauthorized mailbox. It's still there, Mr. Miller. We sent you a notice, a warning, and you chose to ignore it. This is simply unacceptable. Do you understand the severity of this? We will be forced to levy significant fines if this is not rectified immediately." Her voice rose to a crescendo, her face growing even redder. It was clear she wanted to draw attention, to make a spectacle. I glanced at the letter, then back at her, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of my mouth. "Ms. Hayes, with all due respect," I began, my voice calm but firm, "the mailbox that is currently installed at my curb is the plain, standard issue one. The one that came with the house. The one you originally approved, by proxy, by letting it stand there for years before I even moved in." I pointed towards my yard, where the new, plain mailbox stood. The decorative one, the one we discussed, has been removed. It's actually in my garage, waiting to be donated. Her eyes darted towards the curb, then narrowed. She seemed momentarily confused, her angry monologue sputtering to a halt. What? No. That's not possible. I drove past this morning, and it was still there. The wrought iron monstrosity. Perhaps you misremembered, I said softly, almost patronizingly. I installed the new, standard one yesterday afternoon. It's quite obvious. It's plain gray, exactly like most of the others on the street. She stomped her foot, a sound that's surprisingly loud on my porch. Don't you dare accuse me of misremembering, Mr. Miller. I have eyes. I see everything. You are lying. You are trying to circumvent the rules, and I will not stand for it. Her voice was shrill, losing all semblance of control. She was no longer speaking calmly, she was simply shouting accusations, unable to process that her detailed observation had failed her. It was a remarkable sight, witnessing her absolute certainty clash with reality. At this point, a neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a kind elderly woman from across the street, happened to be walking her poodle. She slowed down, her eyes wide with concern, obviously hearing the commotion. Barbara, perhaps sensing an audience, puffed herself up even more, ready to launch into a public shaming. Ms. Hayes, I said, cutting her off before she could continue her outburst. My voice remained calm, a stark contrast to her raging. There's no need for this. If you believe I'm in violation, you're welcome to take a closer look. I have nothing to hide. Perhaps you're mistaken about which mailbox you saw, or when. I took a step back, opening my door wider, inviting her to actually see the standard mailbox she was accusing me of having removed. It was a subtle challenge, daring her to verify her own facts. She hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the standard mailbox, then to Mrs. Henderson, who was now pretending to tie her shoe, but clearly listening intently. The thought of being publicly wrong, of having her meticulous observation skills questioned in front of another neighbor, seemed to give her pause. Her face flushed an even deeper shade of red. She clearly wanted to keep her image of infallible rule enforcer intact. This is not over, Mr. Miller, she snarled, her voice a little lower now, but still laced with venom. I will be consulting with the board. You haven't seen the last of this. With that, she spun on her heel, a whirlwind of frustrated anger, and stomped off my porch, marching back to her SUV with rigid, determined strides. She didn't even bother to close the letter she had waved in my face, it remained crumpled in her hand as she practically stormed down the street. Mrs. Henderson quickly finished tying her imaginary shoelace and scurried away, pretending she hadn't heard a thing. I closed my door, a slow smile spreading across my face. Barbara's inability to admit she was wrong, even in the face of obvious evidence, was fascinating. It showed me she wasn't just about rules, she was about winning, about being right, about exerting power. And her flawed observations were proving to be my unexpected financial windfall. The thought of her driving off in a huff, while my hidden sensor quietly registered her departure and earned me another tiny sum, was immensely satisfying. The Barbara's Bell account was steadily growing. It wasn't enough to retire on, but it was a nice little extra, a daily reminder that I was turning her negativity into my positive. For the next few weeks, things went relatively quiet on the Barbara front. I continued with my daily routines, enjoying my garden, working on small projects around the house. My hidden sensor kept doing its job, silently logging her movements, accumulating those tiny fractions of a cent. It became a quiet, reassuring presence in my life, a little secret triumph. I even started to feel a strange sense of empathy for Barbara, or at least a detached understanding. She seemed trapped in her own need for control, unable to find peace in anything less than perfect compliance from everyone around her. It seemed like a lonely way to live. I wondered if she had any hobbies, any friends, anything that brought her joy beyond finding flaws in other people's property. I genuinely believed that kindness and understanding could solve many problems, but Barbara seemed immune to them. This period of calm was the low point, not in a bad way, but in the sense that there were no major confrontations. It was peaceful. I even started feeling a tiny bit guilty about my secret project. Was I being too sneaky? Was it truly right to profit from someone's misery, even if that misery was self-inflicted and aimed squarely at me? But then I'd remember her screaming at my gate about a leaf, or her trying to force me to change a perfectly good mailbox, and the guilt would evaporate. She had started this feud, I was just finding a creative way to survive it. My life settled back into a pleasant routine. I would wake up, make coffee, and often catch a glimpse of Barbara's SUV as she went about her morning rounds. Each time, my phone would ding faintly, a secret nod between my technology and her predictable pattern. I used the small amounts of money I was accumulating for little treats, a fancy new coffee maker, a comfortable outdoor chair, a subscription to a gardening magazine. Things that enhanced my peaceful enjoyment of my home. It felt like I was indirectly getting paid to enjoy my life, funded by the very person who wanted to disrupt it. It was truly a delightful irony. However, the calm was deceptive, a quiet before the storm. Barbara Hayes, I was quickly learning, was not one to give up. Her brief retreat after the mailbox incident was merely a tactical regrouping. I should have known better. Her obsession with order and control was too deeply ingrained to be deterred by a simple, verifiable fact. She had taken my quiet defiance as a personal challenge, and she was preparing her next move. One evening, I received an official-looking envelope from the HOA, much thicker than the usual newsletters. My heart sank a little. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be good. I opened it carefully, and inside, I found not one, but 3 new violation notices. Each one was meticulously detailed, listing obscure bylaws and alleged infractions that seemed almost impossible. One was for improper shrub height on my front bushes, claiming they were a few inches too tall according to a rarely enforced guideline. Another was for non-uniform fencing material on a tiny section of my backyard fence that bordered a common area, even though it had been there since the house was built. And the third, the most outrageous of all, was for excessive outdoor lighting lumens on my small, decorative porch light. They claimed it was too bright and disturbing to the community ambience at night. My hands trembled slightly as I read through the notices, each one threatening escalating fines if not corrected within a week. This wasn't just Barbara being petty, this was an organized attack. She had gone to the HOA board, twisted facts, and gotten them to send these notices. It was clear she was escalating the war, hitting me with everything she could find, no matter how ridiculous. This was an extreme event, a direct assault on my peace and my wallet. I stood there, the multiple violation notices in my hand, feeling a surge of anger unlike anything I had felt before. She wasn't just trying to annoy me, she was trying to force me out, or at least make my life utterly miserable. And as I looked out my window at her perfectly manicured lawn, a dangerous thought sparked in my mind: what if I could make her pay for every single one of these ridiculous violations? Not just for driving by, but for the very acts of malice she was inflicting upon me? This thought, born of pure frustration and a need to defend my sanctuary, began to take root and grow. The 3 violation notices felt like heavy weights in my hands, each one a testament to Barbara's relentless campaign. Improper shrub height, non-uniform fencing material, excessive outdoor lighting lumens. The sheer absurdity of the accusations was almost comical, but the underlying threat of escalating fines was very real. My initial anger quickly morphed into a steely resolve. This wasn't just petty neighborhood drama anymore, this was a strategic attack, and I realized I needed a strategic defense. My mind raced, connecting the dots between her obsessive rule-following and my existing system. If she was willing to go to such lengths to find infractions, no matter how minor or imagined, there had to be a way to use that against her. My little Barbara's Bell account was proof that her predictable patterns could be monetized. Now, the challenge was to escalate that system, to make it respond not just to her physical presence, but to her malice, her written threats, her very attempts to disrupt my life. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of research and tinkering, even more intensely than before. The internet became my battleground, filled with forums about smart home technology, legal loopholes in HOA bylaws, and even creative ways to automate tasks. I was looking for something specific. A way to link official HOA documents, particularly violation notices, to my existing detection system. It sounded far-fetched, almost like science fiction, but I was determined. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just to protect my peace, but to turn her weaponized rules into my own unexpected benefit. The first step was to automate the processing of these ridiculous violation notices. I found a service that could scan documents and convert the text into digital data. It was like magic, turning paper into words my computer could understand. I set up a small, dedicated scanner and linked it to a new program I began to write. This program was designed to read the violation notices, identify keywords like fine, due date, and violation type, and then log them into a special database I created. This database wasn't just a list, it was a tracking system, keeping tabs on every single one of Barbara's baseless complaints. Every time a new notice arrived, would scan it, and my system would automatically update, charting the course of her escalating attacks. It was meticulous, a bit obsessive, but I knew I needed to be as precise as she was, perhaps even more so. The truly ingenious part of my plan involved connecting this new database of violations to the existing vehicle detection system. I spent hours refining the code, creating a complex set of if-then rules. Here's how it worked. Every time a new violation notice was scanned and added to my database, it would trigger a multiplier in my earning system. For example, if I received a notice about improper shrub height, the next time Barbara's SUV passed my gate and triggered my sensor, instead of earning a tiny fraction of a cent, the system would automatically add a small bonus. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was significant enough to make me smile. The more absurd or frequent her violations became, the higher the multiplier would climb. It was a direct link, her escalating aggression directly translated into increased earnings for me. It was a quiet, digital rebellion. I called this new addition the Malice Multiplier. It was my way of saying, okay, Barbara, you want to play dirty? Let's see how much it costs you. The beauty of it was that the base detection system was already legitimate, contributing to traffic data research. The multiplier was simply an internal calculation based on my own, very personal, data points. It was a private system, completely hidden from outside eyes. Setting up the Malice Multiplier was complicated. There were frustrating moments when the code wouldn't compile, or the scanner wouldn't properly read a handwritten note on a violation. But each time, I reminded myself of Barbara's smug face, her cutting remarks, and the injustice of it all. That frustration fueled me, pushing me to find solutions. I learned more about coding and data management in those few weeks than I had in years. I became obsessed, working late into the night, fueled by strong coffee and a sense of righteous purpose. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the system was complete. It was a complex symphony of sensors, software, and external data platforms, all working in concert to turn Barbara's negative energy into my quiet gain. I tested it with a dummy violation notice, and sure enough, the next time my own car passed the gate, the ding on my phone was noticeably louder, the amount slightly higher. It worked. A wave of satisfaction washed over me, deeper and more profound than before. This wasn't just about making money, it was about reclaiming control, about finding an unexpected victory in a seemingly losing battle. The true test came soon enough. Barbara, true to form, was relentless. A few days after I had perfected the Malice Multiplier, new, even more ridiculous violation arrived in the mail. This one claimed my house numbers were not sufficiently legible, and that their font choice violated a newly discovered aesthetic guideline. It was so absurd, so clearly a desperate attempt to find anything wrong, that I almost laughed. But then I remembered the potential fines. I carefully scanned the notice into my system. A small green light flashed on my tiny hidden computer, confirming it had been processed. The Malice Multiplier was officially active for this new offense. I then waited. I knew Barbara's routine. Every morning, between 8:15 and 8:30, her black SUV would cruise past my house, slowly, predictably, like a predator circling its prey. The next morning, I sat by my window, sipping my coffee, a calm anticipation settling over me. Precisely at 8:22 a.m., I saw it. The gleaming black SUV, turning the corner, slowing down as it approached my property. Barbara's head was already turned, her eyes narrowed, undoubtedly looking for any sign of defiance. As her car passed my gate, perfectly aligned with the hidden sensor, my phone buzzed. Ding! 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 Not one, but multiple notifications popped up, confirming not only the basic passage but also the bonus from the active Malice Multiplier. The amount was surprisingly significant, much more than the usual trickle. It was glorious. Each of her angry, scrutinizing passes now directly filled my digital wallet. She was literally paying for her own animosity. I watched her drive off, her posture stiff, her gaze still fixed on my house in her rearview mirror. She probably thought she had just dealt another blow in her war against my perceived nonconformity. But in reality, she was simply depositing another payment into my Barbara's Bell account. The sheer irony of it brought a wide, triumphant smile to my face. This felt like a genuine turning of the tables, a way to find sunshine in the storm she insisted on bringing. However, just as I was basking in this quiet victory, I noticed something else in her behavior. She wasn't just driving by. She was now stopping, briefly, just past my house, taking out a small notepad and scribbling something down. And the next time, she brought a camera, openly snapping pictures of my front yard. It was a subtle shift in her routine, but a significant escalation. It felt like she was gathering evidence for a bigger attack. A few days later, a new letter arrived, not from the HOA, but from a law firm. It was a cease and desist order, a formal legal document accusing me of repeated violations of community covenants and creating a public nuisance. It listed every single one of the previous HOA notices, but this time, it came with a threat of legal action, a lawsuit if I didn't comply immediately with all her demands. It was clear she had escalated the fight beyond the HOA board, bringing in lawyers, determined to force me into submission. This was no longer just about fines. This was about a full-blown legal battle, and it was a direct, extreme challenge. My blood ran cold, but then a fresh spark of determination ignited. If she wanted to play dirty, legally, then I would make her pay for every single legal threat, too. The cease and desist letter from the law firm felt like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just another petty HOA notice, this was a serious legal threat, complete with menacing legal jargon and the ominous prospect of a lawsuit. Barbara Hayes had gone from being a neighborhood nuisance to a legal adversary, aiming to hit me where it truly hurt, my wallet and my peace of mind. My initial shock quickly gave way to a surge of pure, unadulterated anger. This wasn't just about a mailbox or a bush anymore, this was about harassment, and I was not going to let her win. I spent the rest of the day in a frenzy of activity, but it wasn't frantic or panicked. It was focused, driven by a cold, hard determination. My first step was to contact a real lawyer. I wasn't going to face this alone. I found a highly recommended attorney specializing in property law and HOA disputes. Her name was Attorney Susan Davis, and she had a reputation for being tough but fair. When I explained the situation, from the mailbox to the dead leaf incident, and finally to the ludicrous cease and desist letter, she listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly serious. "This is classic harassment, Mr. Miller," she stated, her voice firm. "Ms. Hayes seems to have a vendetta." While HOAs do have rules, taking it to this extreme, especially with such flimsy accusations, crosses a line. We will respond to this cease and desist letter with a strong counter-argument, and will be ready to defend you if she pursues a lawsuit. Her words were reassuring, a solid rock in the stormy seas Barbara was whipping up. Armed with legal representation, my focus shifted back to my own secret weapon, my Malice Multiplier system. If Barbara wanted to escalate to legal threats, then I would make sure she paid for every single legal document, every menacing letter, and every moment of stress she caused me. This wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about principle. It was about showing her that her negativity would not only fail to crush me but would, in fact, empower me in ways she couldn't possibly imagine. I immediately began to upgrade my system, focusing on how to detect and process legal documents. This was more complex than just scanning HOA notices. Legal documents often had specific formats, unique watermarks, and different types of signatures. I researched optical character recognition (OCR) software that was more advanced, capable of recognizing official legal seals and specific clauses. I also added a feature that would cross-reference the sender's address with known law firm databases to confirm the authenticity of the legal threats. It was like building a high-tech legal document analysis system, all for my own personal defense and, yes, profit. The core idea was to add a new layer to the Malice Multiplier. Whenever my system detected a new, verified legal document from Barbara or her lawyers, it would trigger a significant increase in the bonus amount I received from the traffic data platform. It was no longer just fractions of a cent, it was now small, but noticeable, dollars. Each time her lawyer's letter arrived, it was like she was sending me a personal check, unknowingly funding her own defeat. I called this new addition the legal levy. I worked tirelessly, late into the night, refining the code and testing the new OCR capabilities. There were moments of doubt, times when the technical challenges seemed too great, but then I'd picture Barbara's furious face, her baseless accusations, and the threatening words of the cease and desist letter, and my determination would reignite. This was my way of fighting back, a silent, technologically advanced counterattack. It was a secret source of strength, a feeling of control in a situation that felt designed to make me powerless. When the system was finally ready, I tested it with the cease and desist letter itself. I scanned it, and a new, distinct chime rang from my computer, different from the usual ding. It signified a legal levy activation. The next time Barbara's SUV passed my gate, my phone vibrated with a stronger, more satisfying hum. The amount displayed was significantly higher than ever before. It was working. The thought of her paying for her own legal aggression, piece by piece, filled me with a deep, quiet satisfaction. Life settled into a new, tense routine. Attorney Davis handled the legal back and forth, sending strong rebuttals to Barbara's lawyers. In the background, my legal levy system hummed along. Every time a new legal letter arrived from Barbara's team, my system processed it, and my profits grew. It was a strange kind of symbiosis. The more Barbara tried to legally intimidate me, the more she unknowingly contributed to my financial well-being. My Barbara's Bell account was now growing at a much faster rate, allowing me to comfortably pay for Attorney Davis's services and even put some extra aside. Barbara, of course, remained oblivious to this. Her driving past my house became even more intense. She would slow down to an almost agonizing crawl, her eyes scanning every inch of my property with an exaggerated scrutiny, sometimes even stopping briefly to take more photos. She probably thought she was terrifying me, documenting every imagined flaw to strengthen her legal case. But each prolonged stop, each lingering glance, each furious drive-by, just added to my tally. The more time her car spent in front of my gate, the more detections my sensor made, compounding the daily earnings. It was a magnificent, silent revenge. One particularly memorable morning, I watched her car practically idle in front of my house, as she painstakingly took pictures of my newly trimmed, and perfectly compliant, hedges. As she lingered, I saw a flurry of ding notifications pop up on my phone, one after another, like a slot machine paying out. She was so focused on her perceived victory that she had no idea she was literally filling my pockets. It was a delicious irony. Then came the next extreme event. A few months into this strange legal dance, I received a summons to appear in court. Barbara Hayes was officially suing me. The lawsuit detailed every single one of her ridiculous accusations, from the mailbox to the lighting, painting a picture of me as a defiant, troublesome homeowner. This wasn't just a threat anymore, it was real. The piece I had painstakingly built in Willow Creek was now under direct attack in a courtroom. The calm period was over, replaced by the daunting prospect of a legal battle. My heart pounded, but beneath the fear, a new, fierce determination began to solidify. This lawsuit, this ultimate act of malice, would surely generate the biggest legal levy yet. I knew I had to prepare, not just for court, but for the most significant financial return from Barbara's relentless, self-destructive campaign. The summons to court arrived like a thunderclap, disrupting the fragile peace I had painstakingly built. Barbara Hayes was actually suing me. The thick packet of legal papers detailed every single one of her imagined grievances, painting me as the ultimate rule-breaker in Willow Creek. My stomach knotted with a mix of dread and indignation. This wasn't just about a few dollars in fines, this was a public humiliation, a legal war being waged in the very place I called home. But beneath the fear, a steely resolve hardened within me. This lawsuit, this ultimate act of malice, was her biggest escalation yet, and I was determined to turn it into her most costly mistake. My preparation for court was intense. Attorney Susan Davis, my lawyer, was a calm and steady presence. We spent hours going over every detail, every HOA rule, and every one of Barbara's ludicrous accusations. I showed her photos of my perfectly compliant shrubs, the original fencing material, and the carefully chosen house numbers. We gathered evidence of Barbara's past harassment, her public outbursts, and the threatening tone of her previous letters. Attorney Davis was confident, but she warned me that in civil court, anything could happen. The idea of standing before a judge, defending myself against such baseless claims, was daunting. While Attorney Davis handled the legal strategy, I focused on my own, secret preparations. This lawsuit was the ultimate trigger for the legal levy. I refined my system even further, creating a specific protocol for court-related documents. Every subpoena, every legal filing, every piece of correspondence from Barbara's lawyers would now activate a new, supercharged multiplier. I even configured it to recognize legal timestamps and court seals, ensuring maximum accuracy and, more importantly, maximum profit. The more paper she generated, the more money flowed into my Barbara's Bell account. The stakes were higher now, and so were the potential rewards. The day of the court hearing arrived, crisp and unnerving. The courtroom felt cold and sterile, filled with the hushed whispers of other cases. Barbara was there, of course, seated at a table across from me with her own high-powered legal team. She looked impeccably dressed, her face a mask of self-righteous indignation, as if she were the wronged party, rather than the instigator. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment, hers were filled with a triumphant glare, mine, I hoped, betrayed nothing but calm readiness. She had no idea that every angry glance she threw my way, every stiff movement she made, was unknowingly contributing to my quiet victory. The hearing began. Barbara's lawyer presented her case, detailing my supposed repeated violations, with exaggerated fervor. He showed pictures, read sections from the HOA handbook, and painted a picture of me as a disruptive force in the community. Barbara herself took the stand, recounting her version of events with dramatic flair, emphasizing her role as a vigilant protector of Willow Creek's pristine image. She even choked up a little, claiming I had caused her emotional distress with my blatant disregard for the rules. It was a masterful performance of victimhood. Then it was our turn. Attorney Davis was brilliant. She systematically dismantled Barbara's claims, one by one. She presented my meticulous records, photos proving my compliance, and testimonies from other neighbors who had witnessed Barbara's aggressive behavior. She even called Mrs. Henderson, who, despite her initial shyness, bravely recounted Barbara's loud outburst at my gate about the dead leaf. The judge listened intently, her expression unreadable. During a brief recess, I stepped outside to get some air. My phone buzzed. It wasn't a usual ding notification. It was a series of rapid-fire chimes, like a digital symphony. I glanced at the screen, and my jaw almost dropped. The Barbara's Bell account had just received its biggest single deposit yet. The combination of the court appearance, the legal filings being processed by my system, and Barbara's sheer presence in court had caused a massive payout. It was almost unreal. I had a hard time suppressing a wide grin. She was literally paying for her own lawsuit against me, and then some. The most shocking moment came when Attorney Davis cross-examined Barbara. She pressed her on the specifics of her accusations, poking holes in her memory and her alleged facts. Barbara became flustered, her calm facade crumbling. She started raising her voice, interrupting the lawyer, and contradicting herself. "Ms. Hayes," Attorney Davis asked, her voice calm but penetrating, "you testified that Mr. Miller's mailbox was non-compliant and that you personally observed it for weeks after a warning. Yet, you also admit that the current mailbox is the standard, approved model. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Barbara stammered, her face turning crimson. He changed it. He put it back. He's trying to trick us. So, you admit the non-compliant mailbox is no longer there, and the current one is compliant? Attorney Davis pressed. Well, yes. But he had the other one. Barbara exploded, losing her temper completely. He's a menace. He's trying to ruin our neighborhood. He even puts out strange devices in his yard that watch me. At this, Barbara's lawyer jumped up, clearly startled by her outburst. Objection, Your Honor. Irrelevant speculation. But the damage was done. Barbara's wild accusation about strange devices watching her hung in the air. The judge raised an eyebrow, and Attorney Davis gave me a quick, almost imperceptible glance, a hint of surprise in her eyes. Barbara, in her rage, had accidentally stumbled upon a truth, albeit twisted by her own paranoia. The courtroom fell silent, a palpable tension filling the space. The judge called for another recess, clearly perturbed by Barbara's outburst and the bizarre accusation. During this break, Attorney Davis looked at me, a question in her eyes. Mr. Miller, what was she talking about? Strange devices? I hesitated for a moment, then decided it was time to reveal my secret, at least in part. Susan, I began, choosing my words carefully, I've been recording her behavior for months. Not in a creepy way, but documenting her harassment. I developed a system, using very subtle, passive sensors, to log her continuous, disruptive presence around my property. It's entirely legal, and it's been incredibly accurate in proving her pattern of harassment. Attorney Davis's eyes widened, a slow smile spreading across her face. You mean you have undeniable proof of her relentless observation of your property? Evidence of her stalking you, essentially? More than that, I said, a mischievous glint in my eye. Her repeated, unwarranted passes by my gate have also been financially beneficial for me. Let's just say she's been unknowingly paying for her own harassment, and for your services, through a perfectly legal, automated system I developed. I didn't go into the details of the Malice Multiplier, or legal levy, just enough to spark her imagination. Attorney Davis leaned back, a genuine laugh escaping her lips. Mr. Miller, you are full of surprises. This changes everything. When court resumed, Attorney Davis used Barbara's outburst to her advantage. She argued that Barbara's claims were not only unfounded but stemmed from an obsessive, almost delusional need for control, a need so extreme that she even imagined devices watching her. She presented my extensive documentation of Barbara's harassment, painting a clear picture of a neighbor driven by malice, not legitimate grievances. The judge's final ruling was swift and decisive. She dismissed Barbara's lawsuit, stating there was insufficient evidence of any actual violations on my part. More importantly, she issued a stern warning to Barbara Hayes, cautioning her against further frivolous lawsuits and harassment. The judge even hinted at potential countercharges if Barbara continued her behavior. It was a complete and utter victory for me. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt lighter than air. Barbara and her lawyers were huddled together, their faces grim. She shot me one last, venomous glare, a look of pure, defeated rage. As she stomped out of the courthouse and got into her pristine black SUV, driving away in a furious huff, my phone vibrated one last time with a triumphant cascade of dings. It was the largest single payout yet, the final flourish from the legal levy triggered by the culmination of her lawsuit. She was literally fueling my financial freedom as she drove away in defeat. From that day forward, Barbara Hayes continued to live in Willow Creek, but her reign of terror over my property effectively ended. She still drove past my house, perhaps out of habit or residual spite, but her pace was now quicker, her head often turned away. She never stopped, never scribbled in her notepad, never took another photo. She seemed to have learned her lesson, or perhaps, realizing her tactics were futile, she simply moved on to new targets. But every single time Barbara Hayes's black SUV zipped past my gate, fast and without a glance, my phone would still ding. The Malice Multiplier and legal levy were gone, their purpose fulfilled, but the basic traffic detection system remained. She continued to unknowingly fund my quiet life, one annoyed drive at a time. The initial small, almost insignificant sums had, over months of her relentless harassment and legal attacks, accumulated into a substantial amount. It was enough to pay off my legal fees, put a down payment on a new car, and even start a college fund for a future I hadn't even dared to dream of before. I often think about Barbara, still locked in her world of rules and perceived slights. I, on the other hand, had found true peace in Willow Creek, a peace paid for, ironically, by her very attempts to destroy it. I learned that kindness and empathy are powerful, but sometimes, when faced with pure malice, the clever application of technology can be an even more satisfying form of justice. And every time I hear that faint ding, I'm reminded of the incredible, wild ending to the feud that Barbara Hayes started at my gate, a feud that ultimately, quietly, and continuously, profits me every time she drives past. The gate, once a symbol of confrontation, became a silent, unassuming vault, constantly replenished by the very person who thought she was defeating me. And she never, ever, found out.